Oh, that's a little bright.
Hi everyone, I'm Luke Hector and this is The Broken Meeple, a show where I devote my time to raving and ranting about board games, but usually more the ranting part. This is a special preview for Awaken Realms, where I am basically going over their new upcoming Kickstarter release, Lands of Evershade. I don't do previews very often, I tend to really cherry pick the ones that I want to look at, so naturally I already had some excitement to jump into this, but this one is where I basically go over aspects of the game, try to explain them in more detail so it's easier to understand, give maybe some first impressions as to what I think about some of these elements, but this is not a full review. This is just essentially me giving my first thoughts, which I'm allowed to do, and telling you about how various parts of the game work. We'll deal with a full review when the game's actually fully released. So Lands of Evershade is the new story narrative game from Awaken Realms. And just as a little background from my perspective, Tainted Grail I have talked about a lot. On my top 100 has been one of my favourite story-driven narrative games I've played. Gritty, dark, well-written, well-voice-acted, Arthurian legends, dark and twisted. It is a fantastic story-based game. Had some issues here and there in terms of solo balancing, and certainly it was quite a grindy fest at first, and then they brought out a sequel which fixed a lot of those issues, still had a few that remained, but otherwise still, again, another brilliant story to go through. My buddy Paul Grogan has done a lot of talks and videos on ISS Vanguard, another game which, as much as I didn't necessarily gel with the mechanics of it as much, I certainly still thought that the whole, building your ship and going out into space and finding aliens and getting immersed in that world was like top-notch stellar tier. This is essentially what Awaken Realms does best. They're very good at making immersive settings, immersive scenarios, and putting a lot of effort into the writing and in, if you're willing to use the app to go through them, the voice acting as well. So it's very difficult to beat them in terms of story-based games. Well, Evershade is not related to those two I've mentioned. It's not Tainted Grail 3.0 or ISS Vanguard 2 or anything. This is a brand new setting, new stories, new mechanics, but it is still effectively a story-based game where you take a character, you create them from scratch or use a pre-gen, much like a typical RPG. I used to, do a lot of RPGs in the sort of my teenage days, not anymore, but, I've done Dungeons and Dragons and Shadowrun and all that lot. Still never played Call of Cthulhu. Wouldn't mind trying that one, but I digress. This is basically, definitely made for those sort of people who like those RPGs, like creating their own character and getting immersed in another story where you do skill checks, fight monsters, and all that cool classic stuff that we know.
Maybe we should
put the dice away before I take them away.
So the idea with Lands of Evershade, in a sort of very generalised version of the setting, is that basically the whole world has a bit of a problem with the sun. And not just my kind of problem, where I burn to a crisp every time I stand in it for 5 minutes. It's more that the world has got to a point where the sun is so hot, so nasty, that if it lands anywhere, it basically bleaches out the land and burns you to a crisp. And it's not something you want to stand out in. We're not all vampires in this setting, but the sun has just got that problematic. I won't bore you with the details of gods and deities and stuff, but essentially, one deity has created a veil over the planet to basically act as kind of like a cloud layer. It's almost like the game is basically promoting, the ozone layer in this kind of thing. It pretty much works like that. But it basically stops the sun from getting in and destroying the world, essentially. But the problem is that veil is starting to sort of falter in places. The sun is starting to breach through in very pocket, size. Like even a pinprick in the veil is enough for a beam of light to come through and pretty much scorch whatever it's landing on. And some of the capital cities in this game actually have, big wells in the middle of them because the sun has got through and essentially scorched, drilled a big hole through it. So the idea is that, as well as people having to deal with the fact that this is going to be a thing and living out their lives, another substance, it's unclear as to whether it's a mineral or, just a power or something else, called divinum has entered the realm, and it's starting to bond with various people, and these people are getting, powers, they're able to use magic, and it's making them more, just more powerful in general. But of course, when you get something like that in the world, you have factions who want it, and then you get alliances, alliances, you get betrayals, you get people rising to power, you know, the people at the top, the working class at the bottom. And so, you know, it's essentially a world that's kind of gone to pot. Everyone's trying to survive and deal with the fact that they've got the veil sort of failing above, as well as this new divinum which nobody really understands that well. You are just a band of adventurers that are in this world trying to make a name for yourself, you know, for whatever past reason you might have, and you know, you will play through the game in what are essentially little stories. The stories will have usually about 2 or 3 chapters in them, and each chapter will have a couple of acts, 2 or 3 acts, and you go through the whole story and then it's done. You probably will be able to use your characters in future scenarios or future campaigns, you know, that are a bit more tricky, but you can treat every little story as its own self-enclosed thing if you want. And the idea is that as much as you do have a story to go through and there is a beginning, middle and end, it's not meant to be as long as some of the other games that have come forth. So you imagine Tainted Grail was this huge 12-chapter monster story that took hours and hours and days and weeks to finish. I mean, you know, I don't have my Tainted Grail connection anymore, but blimey, it took me a long time to get through that stuff. This is meant to be more of a kind of bite-sized one. Like, you can go into it with a small story, and it means that it makes it a lot easier to get through it. It means that you're not in a position where you're trying to commit for too long, but it also means that you could play this with multiple people, because you could play with some group for a small story, and then you could switch to a different one and play with a completely different group. It's allowing you to be a little bit more flexible and not have to commit to a die-hard, huge extended length period, which I gotta admit, even for me, is starting to grate a little bit when it comes to campaign games. But let's get into some of the mechanics of the game and how it works, and I'm just going to explain what they do and give some impressions on what I feel about them. So we'll start with the handbook. If you've played anything like Dungeons & Dragons or any other RPG, this kind of thing is going to be apparent to you. This is not the rule book of the game. This is kind of like a lore book and your character creation tool. So when you get started, the first thing that you'll effectively do is read the first paragraph in this storybook book. And if you've played any of their games, it's the typical thing of, you read, right, I want to go to this section here, read section 300. Okay, cool. But when you read the first part of here, it takes you through effectively like a character creation tutorial so that you can build your characters, get started, and then it will take you through the first mission. More on that a bit later. This handbook is what you will use in order to facilitate that. And it's, like a typical D&D handbook. It's got the cool artwork in there, usually the sepia tone stuff. But what it does a fantastic job of doing, I gotta admit, despite the fact this is a work in progress, is that it takes you step by step through everything you need to know about creating a character. So first up we go into chapter 1. It gives you an introduction of the world. So basically what I said a minute ago is, already summarized in there, so you know what the setting is. And then it goes into chapter 2, creating a character. Okay, so first you got to pick your race. There's 4 races in the book, but there's going to be more. And the idea is that it gives you a sort of a brief lowdown on what the races are like, what they tend to do, and then gives you like the various attributes, the technical statistic stuff you need when you play, in this case, a boring human. Who plays an RPG fantasy game to play a human, honestly? But, you could be a dwarf, which, if you want to compare it to, D&D archetypes, it's basically the dwarf. You could also play as an elf, which, have a guess which one that one's like. And you can play as a Bolgrim, which kind of is kind of like a cross between like a kind of half-orc from D&D and Taurens from World of Warcraft, if you've ever played that MMO.
Nerd alert!
Basics on what they look like, what they're kind of like, what they're like in society. Do people tend to shun them? Are they tribal, that kind of thing? And then it gives you some basic attributes to go with, like, the Bolgrim are clearly going to be stronger, the Elf are going to be more intelligent, the Dwarg are going to be, a bit more stronger but subterranean, the humans are going to be a jack of all trades, little basics like that. But you can basically look through all these races and pick one. It'll then go into the next chapter where it will talk about your early years, so your origins. So you can be a Midland citizen, an Arcane Academy student, a Black Ridge lookout. And all of these, again, will have little story beats to tell you what they are, as well as little statistic bits. And that's essentially what you do with this book in general. Step by step, you go through the list and think, you know what, I fancy being this character, and I want to be this origin, and I want to be this particular profession, and I want to be this particular secret origin. And there's quite a lot to choose from in here. I mean, I mentioned 4 races. There's going to be more. There's at least 8, I believe, 7 different origins, and there's going to be more. There's going to be, there's only 4 professions in here, but there's going to be more. So the prototype already gives you a decent amount of variety. In each profession already has 2 different paths that you can take for advancement and how to play them. And then you've got secret origins, you've got, the other professions, what type of, yes, I'm a hunter, but what kind of hunter do I want to be? Am I the quintessential hunter with a bow, or am I more of an animal type hunter? So there's all sorts of things that you can do. And if you don't want to go through all that, then you can just take one of the pre-gen characters and just launch straight into the game.
I am Titanius Anglesmith, fancy man of Cornwood.
But this whole book, as well as explaining other bits about the world, so you can kind of say, well, what is Whitewell? What is the city? You've got plenty in here to get you started, and it's a very good tool. I'm excited to see what other races they'll come up with, because, there's already enough choice in here really to take my liking for a few games, but if they add more to this during the campaign, then you're going to be strapped for choice with this kind of thing that you do. Now, while you're building a character, I'm going to have to sort of take my Bulgrim character that I've been using in one of my games. I've been playing two-handed effectively, but basically you have this track here to create the character. So you'll take a portrait sheet first for whoever it is you do, and the whole sort of sheet tab thing is basically a lot of slots for you to introduce little things in that tell you what your character is. So think of it like drawing up a character sheet, but you don't need pen and paper. And you've got slots here for the items, you've got your experience track here, you've got your attributes that you slot in and out, your movement value, HP value or the like. But the particular highlight is the part down the left, which is where you slot in all the stuff that we've just been deciding in this player's handbook. So start off, right, I am a Bulgrim, okay? I'll slot in my race. That tells me I'm wild and large. These are keywords that if you've played these kind of games before, you'll see when you do skill checks. If you are large, for example, like, you've got to catch up to this killer, and you're trying to get through this like panicking crowd and panic cows or whatever. If you are large, get an extra die. It's that type of thing. And then in the other slots here, I've got things like I'm a Black Ridge Lookout, so that gives me pathfinding and vigilance. I'm a fighter, that gives me close combat, warfare, intimidation. My secret origin is my past, and you'll be able to get more skills and conditions as the game goes on, and they'll slot into the other bits. But this effectively is your character, and every time something changes, all you got to do is just take the token or the thing out and slot a new one in. So there's none of this like rubbing out with a pen and paper and taking a new clean sheet or anything like that. And what you'll do is that you'll have some tokens on here, and some will be in your little pouch. I mean, there's a little box. I don't know what they'll do in the actual game, but this thing that basically allows you to store stuff in between games and rest phases, because you can't equip everything. You've only got so many hands, you've only got so much equipment space. So any stuff that you can't use, and this includes skill cards, we'll get onto that a bit later, then they'll go into your little pouch, and you just basically keep it with your character sheet. But that's, the basis of character creation. There's a lot of variety in here. The game will take you step by step through doing it, and you'll barely have to read a rulebook in advance. There will be a rulebook with the game, obviously, and certainly it will help to have that on the side. But if you want to just get stuck into the fun aspects of creating characters and, right, this is my person, this is who I'm using, here's my story, then you can just grab the handbook and go nuts straight from the get-go. So let's talk story and exploration. So the storybook is your friend. This thing will have all the story beats that you can read, all the bits that tell you a nice bit of lore and fluff, and then this tells you what choices to make, like choose your own adventure, as well as making skill checks. There is an app that you can have on your phone. This will have all the text from here on the app, as well as the voice acting. And as much as the app was not fully complete when we used it, it's still like, oh yeah, the voice acting files we still had on a sound, like on a different page, so we could load them up. And the voice acting is the same people as they did for Tainted Grail, and it's stellar, it's great, it's done really well, they read it properly, and it just gets you more and more immersed in that world. If you just want to read the text yourself, then go ahead, but it's a nice additional feature that they throw in if you use the app. And the app can be useful, because then it's on your device, and you can pass it, easier to read it on your screen maybe, but then it also means you haven't necessarily got a big book around. So it's down to your personal preference. The only thing that I will say from the app is that, granted this is a prototype, they only had like one music file on there. It was quite short and mostly on the loop. It'd be nice if the app had more music on it, more tracks, longer tracks, by all means, create a Lands of Evershade soundtrack or something, an official soundtrack with about 12, 13 songs that you can pick and choose which ones you want, some for combat, some for exploration. I think it'd be pretty sweet if you did that. Skill checks are effectively done with D10s, with the typical, here's the skill modifier, threshold that you need to beat. You know, I use my strength and I get, you know, bonus dice if I have a keyword like large or pathfinding, but other players can also support you. If you're in the same place, then I might, for example, roll 4 dice for my strength, but then because I need animal handling and my character next to me has animal handling, then they provide an extra die to me. So your decision as to who does the check and who supports can be influenced by what bonus dice you get from keywords. It's not always as simple as simply picking who has the biggest attributes. You might actually find you could have a better die if you use an alternative method. But you'll roll the dice, you'll try to get a success, but if you fail or roll ones, you actually generate these fate tokens that allow you to re-roll dice in future checks. So sometimes it's actually not necessarily a bad thing to fail if you know you're going to get a bunch of fate tokens, because it's like, well, you know, we were trying to convince him to give us a bit more money for this job. If we fail, it's not the end of the world or something. You know, I'm getting 2 fate tokens for this. Sweet. Let me grab 2 of these little white beads, and now I've got them for later. Like maybe during a boss battle when I'm trying to stay alive. You know, somewhere it's a bit more important. So, you know, the checks are very simple, they're quick, and it's all based off your typical sort of archetypes of RPGs, like having the keywords as well as the attributes.
Let me go back in there and face the peril. No, it's too perilous.
In terms of progressing through the game, you have this tracker here. So this tracker is essentially where you put markers on to say that you've done various story elements. Like it will tell you mark story element G or whatever, and so later on when you meet another character, it'll be like, is G marked? In which case go to this paragraph. You know, these will track them. You also have a little timer thing down here, this little round disc thing, which basically gives you things like night, midnight, dusk, morning, evening, afternoon, and sometimes it will want you to track time by this, and you just spin it round and it's all nice and simple. But the idea with this tracker is that to the side of it, you put these big sheets. So rather than having a big spiral bound book with maps in, like, you know, some other publishers have sort of made a name for themselves doing, or having a huge board that you've got to lay out, or certainly different from the card system that Tainted Grail use, now you have these giant sheets that you basically put down. So for example here, one of the first few here, you've got the chase, and this gives you a really nice artwork map of the city that you're in. It's got the different segments of it, like the cattle pens, the plaza, toll house. It may give you, you know, story numbers, so if it involves you going somewhere in a book, it will have the number next to it, and you'll have miniatures and little flag markers that you'll put on the map, and this will move around much like you're moving it around in a typical RPG game. But these sheets will chop and change as the game goes on, so you'll put them to the side of the tracker. So first up I've got this one, the chase, going through this particular city. I then decide, you know, we get a bit further, and I don't want to reveal too many of these, but, you know, now I've got like a journey to Whitewell. So now I've got a different one that has a map of the outer areas, and now I can pick which route I want to go. Again, there's maps for that. But then it also can lead into some combat scenarios. So, you know, the typical thing of you're playing through a D&D game and then you get into a combat. Right, let's get the miniatures and all the terrain on this little grid map and we can get going. Well, they provided that for you. You effectively have sheets that have the location on them. It has the grid system where you put your starting people, bonus actions you can do. This one, for example, is a warehouse. I won't say why you might end up in a warehouse, but essentially this is your map. It's already got it for you. It just tells you to put the sheet down. You put your miniatures on there. So here's my Bulgrim dude, here's my elf dude, and then I put other people on besides. This means that this can be larger because it needs to be in order to encase all the miniatures, although some of the miniatures do have quite a bit of detail on them and quite a bit sticking out. So even at this size, you may find that it can get a little bit crowded at times when you've got a lot of other opposing minions there, but I don't think they can really make the sheets that much bigger and still make the box not be gigantic. But, you know, you're going to have to accept that, much like in typical of these sort of games, there's going to be a little bit of a crowded affair at times.
But wait! There's more!
Advancements are pretty straightforward in this. Essentially, down the side of your board, you have these little notch tokens, and it can be a little bit annoying having to put a load of these in, but, you know, it's a way to, you know, have them on your sheet. Although I am curious as to how they're going to make it easier to save between games. There wasn't really a save function in the prototype, and if you've got all this, then obviously you can't tip it upside down or put it on vertical because then everything's going to fall out. So I am curious as to how they're going to get around this problem and make the save game feature, you know, as smooth as it can be. So, yeah, we'll wait and see on the campaign for that. But the idea is that you have these little notches in here and you have an experience marker at the bottom. When you gain XP, you level it up, and as soon as you hit the next notch, You take it out, pop it on your little advancement tree, and then the player's handbook has details of what skills you can upgrade. You can upgrade based on, you know, your main, like, what are you? Okay, I am a fighter, but then you can also upgrade certain specific skill sets within. You know, I mean, I am a paladin. Okay, I can upgrade my paladin skills, or because I'm good at close combat, I could upgrade my close combat skills specifically, and both of them have really cool things that you can do. You want to have everything, but you can't have everything. So you gotta pick and choose what it is you want to specialize in, and it allows you to create some very unique style characters. So now we're going to talk about combat and skills. So skills work on this hotbar that you have next to your board, and there's a few slots that you unlock, but basically there are these cards that you slot into the slots, and there are some offensive and defensive, support, action, reaction, that type of thing. But this is something you create in between rest phases. So you may have more cards that you've got in your little pouch, but you can't have everything at once. You've only got so many slots, and if you want to slot them out and change them, you've got to rest. So it reflects that, you know, that makes the rest phase more useful, but it means that you can kind of chop and change what it is you try. I mean, you could try a certain build with the cards you've got and think, that's not really getting used much, that doesn't work for me, I'm much more better at this. Okay, let me just swap that out and swap this one. And as you get more skills as the game goes on, maybe you pick up an item that gives you a new skill card, or it's just something that comes with an advancement. Like, you know, I can, for example, what have we got? This one's not the best example. Let me pick the Alf one that I had. So I picked up a skill, when I did an advancement, I picked up Energy Bolt, you know, effectively magic missile. Well, that gave me this card. So I swapped it out with my quarterstaff attack, because let's face it, this character's not really doing a lot of close combat, and now that's my offensive action. It has everything you need to know about the skill on the card. You don't have to read the rule book to figure out what your individual skill card does. Yes, you need to read the rule book now, how the combat phase and all that works, but, you know, in terms of the skills, their range and what they are, whether they're a reaction, what damage you roll, what successes you need, and all that stuff, it's all on here. A lot of information is out in front of you, so you don't have to keep checking the rulebook on a regular basis. But this is how you essentially create the skills that you can do, and these tell you, you know, roll for this, what's the difficulty, what bonuses do you get, like command, roll charisma, difficulty 8, +1 die if you got leadership. Very nice and simple, and you just follow it here. Once you use a skill, you flip it over. It may have some secondary effect on the back, but what it's mainly doing is that it's changing the symbology on some of the cards from suns to moons or back again. We'll get into what exactly the relevance of that is in a minute. But this is just like another way to customize your character in between rest phases and create kind of like the build that suits you. Again, further differentiating your character from other players. Now, in terms of combat, the idea is that you'll have your, you know, combat phase in general. So, I mean, I'll just pick this one here, the archive, and it will have the grid, you'll have your miniatures on it, and each of the adversaries have their own big major cards. So here we've got goons, a rogue, and a mage. I won't say where they turn up, but basically you have their individual combat cards. It tells you how many HP they've got, what their difficulty rating is in terms of dodging, defending, that kind of thing, and their activation deck. So each of them have specific cards that are numbered, and they'll have, you know, various action cards that they do when they act in combat. It gives them the kind of like a pseudo AI system for piloting enemies. It's not, they don't just simply, you know, charge in headstrong and see what happens. You know, some of them will be a bit more crafty depending on what type of character they are. So, for example, here I think I've picked up probably picked up a rogues one here or something. So, for example, when they activate, you flip over the top card and you resolve the effects. Well, one of them here is rush and precise cut. So this is your typical move very fast towards an enemy and give them a close combat stabbing. But then there's another one here that says take cover and then shoot from afar. So they do chop and change what it is they decide to do. And their targets typically say sun or moon. Sun tends to be more offensive and moon tends to be more defensive. So you actually have times where the characters might target specific characters in your party based on what they're doing. So if the rogue's decision is to, you know, hide and shoot from afar, they might decide, right, well, I'm going to hide over here next to where cover is, and then I'm going to shoot whoever it is that's standing at the back over there and being all very well and hidden. that's the one with all the moon symbols, that's possibly your ranged character. So the AI does get a little bit crafty at times. Not loads, I mean this is a board game with cards, they can only do so much with it, but it is a lot more refreshing to see that kind of thing than just simply enemies just rush towards you and see what happens. It's like, nah, it's a good way for the AI to be a little bit unpredictable at times, at least the first time you come across them. I mean, if you play the game again and you see the characters, you have some idea of what they're doing, but because you only activate one card in each activation, if they've got like a 3 or 4 card deck, you don't know what they're going to do next, so they are still, again, unpredictable. And the way that combat starts off is you have this pouch full of discs, and these discs are white, black, or dual purpose. So the scenario will tell you put so many of these colored discs into the bag. If you're ambushed, you might have to put more black ones, which is the enemy. If you get the jump on them, you might put more white in, for example. And what happens is that you reach into the bag, draw one out, and this effectively relates to initiative. So this one is a white one. So I get to activate a character. So one of us in the party gets to activate and do our stuff. This refreshes your skills, which is very important, because if you've used up all your defensive skills, you're a sitting duck. But then it allows you to do 2 actions and decide whether you want to attack or move and all that stuff. But then you draw another one out, and in this case I draw black. So now the first enemy deck activates. So now the rogue is going to activate and do all their stuff. And you basically carry on until everybody's acted. But the timing of when they come out is important, including who you pick to activate. The enemy activates based on a sequence, but for you, it might be like, well, okay, we've just run out of white. I could do a lot of damage if I went now and possibly take out these enemies. Yeah, but our friend here used up all the defensive stuff in the last attack phase they had. They're now defenseless. If the enemy starts acting and they don't have their cards flipped, they're going to be screwed. Maybe they should activate first just so they've got their defenses up. Again, this is tactical opportunity, so tactical decision making that you're making with your teammates to decide who should activate. It's not just every hero, it's one hero. Which hero? There's going to be different reasons why you want some people to wait and why you might want them to activate as soon as physically possible. The dual ones are a little bit special. The idea with these ones is that you basically pick which one is white or black. So, you know, I draw one of them out and it's like, well, we could let the enemy act now because we feel pretty safe. We've got our defenses up. Won't be too bad, or maybe I need an emergency activation right now. But then when you draw the other one that's dual, or the next one that's dual, I don't know how many there will be at different scenarios, but then whichever one you picked last time, the next one has to be the opposite. So you get to kind of, you know, almost augment the initiative order slightly with drawing certain beads, but then there are certain skills like command that let you add more of your tokens to the bag and improve your initiative. So it's not necessarily set in stone. You know, you have a starting amount of tokens, but this amount of tokens here can be manipulated, and you can, you know, kind of use things tactically rather than just sticking to a boring, like, what's my initiative? 9. Right, well, I'm always going first because I've got initiative 9 and everybody's only got initiative 8. You know, that sort of stuff worked before. I quite like this as a new means of, again, unpredictability, tactics, but also a little bit of tension, because, you know, you might really want to go next and then you draw a couple of enemies. It's like, this is going to hurt a little bit, but that's the way it goes. Sometimes the enemy just gets the drop on you, or sometimes they're a bit more fleet-footed than you would. You know, it makes initiative order more dynamic and not just linear, predictable, and in some ways exploitable. There is no roll to hits in this. You hit. They hit. That just happens. What you're rolling for is typically damage. So how much damage do I do? So that takes out an extra step, makes the combat a bit more streamlined, a little bit less focused, a little less like cluttered. But it does mean that one thing I have noticed is that combats can be quite difficult because you only have so many ways to defend as a result. You typically get given a dodge and an endurance card to begin with. Now, depending on your character, your dodge may be standard or really bad or really good, and the same for endurance. So for example, you know, this Bulgrim here, a clumsy dodge but exceptional endurance. These are your 2 main ways to take damage, and you only get 1 use of them each before your next activation. And if you roll badly, or if you get attacked before you've refreshed the cards, you're basically a sitting duck. It is feasibly possible for you to run into combat, have a bad initiative order, and get completely mauled by a couple of goons. It's doable. I mean, the goons in this deal 3 damage apiece. You only have 6 HP to begin with on some characters. You could be killed by 2 characters if you just don't have your defensive cards up. So it can make some combats quite difficult in that respect. You've got to play a bit more cautiously and not just charge headlong into combat, because it's really going to screw you over if you do. Now, that being said, you do recover HP quite quick in this. All you got to do is do a rest phase and it automatically rejuvenates. Again, keeping things simple. But it does mean that some combats will definitely be easier or harder depending on initiative order, but also depending on your tactics. You know, charging headstrong will get you killed, end of. But what you also need to bear in mind is some of the extra things on the sheets. Where did I put all those sheets? So I just had them. I had them here. Here we go. All of these. So for example, and mild spoiler alert, but you know there are different ways to approach each scenario. Here's a descent one. So you got a lift here. You're on 2 separate lifts and you're descending into a big cavern thing. Now you're on one side, the enemy's on the other, and they're walking across planks to get to you. But they have special actions on the sheet which anybody can do. They work exactly like skill cards, but they're location specific, okay? So adding some cool uniqueness to each combat. But the idea is that these actions are not to be underestimated. Like, you should be using them all the time. In this particular battle, if you try to fight every single enemy one-on-one and try and do it as a fair fight, I think you pretty much will lose. I can't see how you would actually succeed. But these particular bottom actions tell you, like, push the planks off the platform. Okay, cool. So I can actually push the planks off, and that means that I bottleneck the enemy. Fantastic. Tactical advantage. Oh no, that was in the storybook. This one here has you basically pushing people off the lift. So some areas on here are basically deadly terrain on here, and you might be like, well, I'm a large character. Woof! You fall off the lift, auto kill. Yeah, it's possible to just insta-jib enemies in this game, and, you know, without too much trouble. But then there's another one in here, cut the chain. Ranged character, depending on how many successes you get, you see what happens. The combat I had in this scenario, I thought there was no way my 2 characters are going to take out all these enemies. It's just not going to happen. So what ended happening was that I basically decided, right, I'm going to, like, cover the people on the front bit with this Bulgrim dude. You, wizard at the back, you got your bolt, it's ranged. Would you mind shooting that chain? Rolled to hit, got about 3 successes. The whole platform collapsed. Basically, the 2 elites and some of the goons insta-died, leaving me with just 1 or 2 goons to mop up. Poof, off you go. Took a bit of damage, but not too bad. This turned a combat that, if 2 people were trying to fight against them, they'd probably die horrifically, into not a trivialized combat, but certainly made it a lot easier. And that is some of the cool stuff with the combat. There are times where you do need to use the environment to your benefit, but it does worry me that maybe some of the combats are going to be a little bit too hard if you don't do this, or if you try to do the classic, like, kill everything in sight. You need to play a little bit more intelligently with some of the combats, and with 2 characters, you don't have a lot of HP between you. I mean, I've got 8 here, 6 there. That's only 14 HP. If a typical goon is doing 3, and other characters can do more, it doesn't take many attacks against you when you're undefended to just blat you outright. And having more characters in the group will make some successes a little bit harder, but for the most part, they just add maybe 1 extra goon on the battlefield. 1 extra goon, a whole other character, I feel like that's not bad. So maybe combats are going to be a bit easier when you have a group of 4 people, as opposed to playing 2-handed. Now, this prototype didn't allow me to play true solo. They're going to have to make certain they get this right. True solo in Tainted Grail was extremely hard, to the point where you had to house rule it to an extent. You know, a slight annoyance. But I'm hoping that they've taken the feedback on board and they make certain that true solo can work, or that less characters can work. You know, combat should be balanced to cater for player scaling, and I don't want a situation where going into this true solo, or with only 2 characters, creates combats that are just damn near impossible. And certainly I came across a couple that were somewhat tricky. Like, you don't die outright if you lose a combat, so it's not entirely like, oh, you die, you lose, you've got to rinse, repeat it. But, cool, blimey, yeah, there were some combats in this through the campaign I was doing where I thought, how on earth could 2 people possibly win this without some serious luck? You know, maybe I'm just not good with the tactics part of it, I don't know, but there's only so many defense cards you have maybe they need to add more ways to defend, or maybe this is just how the game is. You know, you've got to go into this not thinking that you are super powerful, super insane. You know, think of it like going into a D&D campaign as a level 1 or 2 character. As a wizard, your D4 hit points, you could literally be killed by a stiff breeze as a wizard in D&D level 1. So you don't rush into a giant battle with a beholder in front of you and expect to come out unscathed. Here, it's the same thing. Yes, you are adventurers. Yes, you are heroes. You are not stupidly powerful. You've got to bear that in mind. This is something that I'm definitely going to be keeping an eye on for its Kickstarter campaign and when it goes through, and naturally I will do a full review when the game releases and I get a proper copy of it, but I'm definitely recommending that this one is one that you look at. You know, if you're not into storybook narrative style games, this isn't going to win you over, so don't bother. But if you're a fan of RPGs, if you want an easier entry point to what Awaken Realms does with this kind of thing, this is probably your best bet to start. You might have been, you know, a little bit intimidated by their previous fare. This one doesn't feel intimidating. You know, there's a lot of bits I've shown you. You know, you've got all those sheets, you've got this board and the cards and the initiative bag and, you know, obviously these cool, you know, miniatures as always, but it never felt like it was too much. I felt like I could get into this and progress through it at a pretty good pace, and because the scenarios are only effectively 3 chapters with a couple of acts of each, you know, that kind of thing, I don't have to feel like I'm going to have to spend the next several weeks playing through it before I finish. You know, I mean, if you really wanted to, honestly, if you really wanted to, you could have a weekend session with your friends and start on Saturday morning, play till about Sunday night with breaks in between. I reckon you could get through one of the stories in that time. You might even be able to do it in a day if you're really quick. Yeah, well, you might have to be quite quick on that with a big group, but, you know, you could make a weekend of it and get through the story. You know, which is pretty good going, because normally you got to wait months and months to finish it. Here, you can do it nice and quick. So I'm entertained to see what they do in terms of more races, more origins, more characters. I want to see what other, you know, how many stories they're going to be. I mean, this is one story with a very good tutorial in it. That's something else to mention. You know, the tutorial will take you step by step through the first mission. You can skip it in future playthroughs, but, you know, you can really get stuck into this nice and quick. But I want to see what other stories they have. You know, how many are they going to release? It's going to be quite exciting to see what's next. So that's it for me on this episode of The Broken Meeple. If you like what you see, then please thumb it up on YouTube and thumb it up on Board Game Geek when it goes live on the page. There will be a link to the Kickstarter in the description, so by all means check that out. Failing that, you can just do a Google search for Lands of Evershade Kickstarter or GameFound. I'm sure it will work just fine. But obviously let me know your thoughts. You know, do you think this is going to appeal to you based on what I've said? You know, is it something that you'll probably avoid? But the main thing to do is check out as much content as you can. Paul Grogan, I'm sure, will do some content on this game very soon. I've done this video here for you. Hopefully it's been useful. But other content creators will obviously cover the game as well. So by all means, get a wide variety of opinions. Have a look at the campaign. See if it's similar to something you would enjoy. And then decide if you want to invest your money at that point. I never like to tell people to go spend their money willy-nilly on a game just because I have good thoughts about it. It's your money. You earn it. We all have things to afford. Family, kids, and all that stuff. So basically, just do your research. Hopefully this video has been useful and it allows you to make your own decision as to whether it's something you want to back on Kickstarter. So take care, and remember, especially when it comes to Kickstarter, it's still only a game. So bye for now.